Untitled 6-speed here, and it is a deadly hot day today here in Vancouver. Well, deadly hot for Vancouver, that's for sure. It's probably about 28 to 30 degrees Celsius outside. I'm here to ask you a question. Have you ever been pulling your boat along and just feel the trailer go clunk really hard when you go to brake? You notice this especially when going down hills. Maybe your truck brakes, you feel like you're having to ride them a lot harder, use them a lot more. You're driving around in traffic and the trailer seems to almost rear end you every time. Well, the likely cause of this is that the brakes, the surge brakes in the trailer aren't working. So if we come over here, now the first thing you need to do is make sure that your trailer brakes are in decent adjustment. This one probably needs a bit of adjustment, but it's not bad. And then, grab me a screwdriver. We come over here to the master cylinder, and whenever you step on the brakes, if this hammers against this stop here, that's usually a pretty clear indicator. But then what we do is we pop off this brake fluid cover, and I don't know if you can see down in there, but that thing is completely empty. So there's a very likely chance that we got a bad wheel cylinder, but we won't know until we get the drum off. So today we're going to fix that. I've already shown you guys how to do drum brakes on these, how to repack the wheel bearings. So I'll probably skip the boring parts and just get straight to the wheel cylinder. But first thing we need to do is we need to remove the wheel and tire. Oh, it's already on there. So this is an 08 Caravan trailer, and it has a 13/16 lug. There's 6 of them on there. Love my new compressor. Alrighty, now we just pull the tire off, and we're left with this massive drum brake. So, first thing we gotta do is we gotta pop off this cap. What I like to do is I either like to use these guys and grab it, pull it. Now, as we can see, there is some moisture in here, just judging by the color of the, it's kind of a milky color almost. So next step we need to do is we need to get the cotter pin out. So this guy pushes over to the side. Probably can't see it too well because it's in a bit of rough shape. It's all covered in grease. This is the most important part of doing the wheel bearings, making sure you got a good cotter pin in there. Because if you forget it, you're likely losing your trailer wheel. And if you lose your trailer wheel, you're likely losing your boat. So, cotter pin. And now what we need to do is we go and we loosen this nut. Now this nut shouldn't be too tight because you only do it up hand tight. So make sure when you get all your parts, you get a new wheel seal and you get a new cotter pin. Make sure you always replace that cotter pin. It came with a solid pin in these originally, and that thing was just a nightmare to get out, so I replaced it with a cotter pin. So we're going to take this guy and we're going to pop it in here. And then what we do is we take our drum, slide it out, and there we are. There's our prize right there. Holy hell, this thing's heavy. Oh. Alright, so if we come in a little closer here, oops, we notice that you got plenty of meat on the brake shoes. The brake shoes aren't the issue, but it looks like these wheel cylinders are kind of old and beat up. So it's probably time for new ones. So I'm probably just going to replace them. Now it appears that they have 2 bolts in the back. There's one here and there's one up here. And you can probably get this thing out without having to do too much surgery to it here. You won't have to take the brake shoes off, most likely. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my hands off. Alright, so here we are back here in the back of the wheel cylinder. Now there's two bolts, one here and one here. And these are both 13 mil or 1/2 inch. And this flare nut here is a 3/8 inch. Now, I would definitely recommend a flare nut wrench. Somebody wants to give me one, that would be nice. This one came off real nice. This whole thing is coming off really nicely, but mind you, this boat doesn't see salt water ever, so Fraser River isn't salty. So, yeah, it seems to do okay. So before I get this all the way off, I'm going to put a drain pan underneath it, and then I'm going to take it all the way off. Then after that, we need to remove these two bolts here and here. Not sure if you can see that, but it's pretty much the same on the opposite side, just reversed. So, once we got the brake line removed, we remove the two bolts in the back. Try not to lose a lock washer like we just did. Now remember, when you put this sucker back together, Annie sees everything, because not all of them come out this nice, let me tell you. Even ones on cars don't come out this nice. I'm actually quite shocked. Oh, yeah. That's really good. So we may or may not need to pull the brake shoe out of the way. Pop it out. I believe this push rod gets reused, so don't throw it away. It actually doesn't look too bad. It doesn't look like there's really anything wrong with this thing. It's just dry as a bone. I'm thinking that the other side might be our offender, but since they're pretty cheap per side, may as well do them both at the same time. Now I'm going to keep everything together. So don't lose this push rod, whatever you do. But I'm going to rip the other side apart quickly, and then we can go and get some parts. Now what really helps, what you can do like I did, is if you've done a brake jaw or a wheel seal on these before, keep the box. And on this trailer, it's an SKF 21352 wheel seal. So make sure that you get the part numbers for that, because that makes ordering these things a lot easier. Alright, so we're back from our little parts store run. So we got our wheel seals, our cotter pins. I have a big tub of grease in the garage, so that's not a big deal. And we got our left and right hand wheel cylinder assemblies. Now, that is, they have two different sides, so make sure you order two different sides. And generally, this little push rod doesn't come with it, but I brought it with me just in case. Turns out that this guy doesn't. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to throw the wheel cylinder back in. Installing your wheel cylinder, how do you know which side is what? Well, you always make sure that the bleed nipple is facing up. It should be the highest point in the system. So what I'm going to do is, just for sanity's sake, I'm just going to put a little dab, not too much, of silicone brake lubricant on the end of this push rod. I'm just going to stick it in there. Well, it doesn't seem to want to go in, but we'll sit this guy right here. Ugh, this is going to be more frustrating than I thought. Why did I know that this was going to be a wrestling match? Alright, so after much wrestling, I got the wheel cylinder in. Now you need to go underneath, pop out the little yellow plug, and start threading the brake line in while you can still maneuver the wheel cylinder. The reason why we want to get the brake line in first is because we want it to We want to be able to maneuver the wheel cylinder around. Make sure that that push rod doesn't fall out, whatever you do. Now it doesn't have to be tightened all the way, you just want it to get started and be doubly sure that it's not cross-threaded. Then what we do is we take our 2 bolts. Gonna give them a nice dab of anti-seize. Then what we do is we tighten up the mounting bolts. These nice ratcheting gear wrenches are the best. I love them so much. There we go. So that's nice and tight. And now we finish doing up the brake line. This could be a little difficult to get in there. Alright, so now it's time to remove the bearings. So this one's pretty easy. There is a thrust washer here. It usually just sticks to this guy here. And this is the outer bearing, sorry. Usually generally smaller than the inner one. Doesn't look too bad. Anyway, so now what you're going to do is you're going to drive the inner bearing out. And what you want to do is you want to use a drift punch and a hammer, and you want to drive it on the race. Don't ever drive it on the cage. Because if you do, you've basically ruined your bearing. So the trick to doing this, just kind of scoop out some of the grease. Don't mar the races while you're in there either, the inner races. This shouldn't take too much force. All you're trying to do is just drive the wheel seal out. This is a messy job. These Blue Scott shop towels really do help. I usually have a good deal on at my local Canadian Tire. There we go. Now what we need to do is toss this guy out. We flip this guy over. And here is the inner bearing. Looks okay, I didn't miss. Thank God. And our old wheel seal, which leaves a little bit to be desired. That goes in the garbage. So now you have 2 options. You can go, well, you're going to have to do both, but which one you do first is at your discretion. What I generally do is I take my fingers and I scoop out all of the old grease that's in the hub, or as much of it as I possibly can. Sometimes it helps if you turn it on its side. You just see all that grease in there. Keep in mind, this is a very messy job. Bearings are always messy. So that's the vast majority of it. Remember, there's another side to repeat too, so keep that in mind. So that's kind of the bulk of it cleaned up. We're going to go in there with a bit of mineral spirits and clean that all up. But for right now, let's take these over to the bench and clean them up in some salt. So I got my little container here, and I have my toothbrush, old toothbrush. And we're just going to drop it in here, and we're going to clean out all the old grease and crap out of the bearings. This really helps if you have a solvent tank, but since nobody's given me one yet, hint hint, this is the best we gotta deal with right now. Seems to want to roll a lot nicer. You really want to get the guck out of between the bearing rollers here. And then we want to look at the rollers and make sure that there isn't any excessive wear or rust or pitting or anything like that. If you see any of that, then you're probably going to have to replace these things. They're kind of in rough shape. But these ones are in very good shape. And my solvent is red. I prefer using a good, like, sticky red grease, wheel bearing grease. Try not to use the biodegradable green stuff. I know environment and everything like that, but when you dunk these things in and out of the water all the time, the green grease, I find, destroys bearings in boat trailers. So use the red grease in this one. I got a big tub of the Pennzoil grease because this job gets done on this boat so frequently. There we go. That's the vast majority of it done. It helps if you kind of slap it against a cloth like this. You see all the junk coming out of it. Alright. Then we can go back in and continue cleaning. Again, try to get as most of this old grease out as possible, because it's you don't want waterlogged grease in there. Now this side isn't near as bad as the other side. I do see a bit of water contamination, but not much. It kind of makes it look almost like the Airheads taffy. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's kind of a lighter red color like that. That's water contamination, that pinkish color, and that's definitely not good. That's why I find with the green grease it tends to dissolve really easily, and I don't generally like that. This bearing looks okay. Spins alright. There's not too much gunk coming out of here anymore, so we should be good to go. So there's the outer bearing. Alright, so before we continue, I've cleaned up the inside of this hub. And now I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's a bit of darkness in the race, but nothing too major. If we run our thumb along it, it still feels nice and smooth, or thumbnail. It shouldn't be heavily dark or scored or anything like that. It should, there's a little bit of wear, but nothing major. And I've gone in here and cleaned up all the old grease, and again this shows a little bit more wear, but there's no scoring, so we're all good. And so now it's time to clean out the bearings. So to do this, alright, so what you want to do is you want to take your bearing, take your blowgun, you're going to want to blow like this all around. Now, and do that on the opposite side. You want to keep doing that till you're not getting any more solvent and stuff out of the bearings. You want it to be totally dry and clean. kind of like this one right here. Perfectly clean and dry. So if you want to, you can blow it like this, but make sure you hold on to the race and the cage at the same time so that you don't spin the bearing up. Because if you do that, it could overspeed and blow up. And yeah, make sure you wear safety glasses too. That's very, very important. Alright, so now we're going to pack the bearings. So, rule number 1, make sure your hands are fairly clean. You don't want any dirt in your bearings. Number 2, use a good quality wheel bearing grease. Number 3, always do the inner bearing first, the big one. So, this is a very messy job, so make sure you have plenty of shop rags on hand. Alright, so first things first. You grab a dollop of grease. You put that grease in the palm of your hand. Now that might be a little much. Now I've seen people do this wrong all the time and it drives me mental. So I've seen people push grease in there. That I don't like. Grab it with 2 fingers like this and you pull. Pull the grease through the bearing like this. When you do, don't be afraid to use a lot of it either. That's what it's for. So you'll notice that it pushes through there. So what I do is I let it go, I turn it a little bit, and then I continue. And you continue doing this, and you can kind of see the grease is starting to push through here. And then again, rotate. Sometimes you can take the grease on the inside, put it back in your hand. Try not to smear it, because then you don't know what's done and what's not. Again, this is a really messy job, but you want to make sure it's done right, because there's nothing worse than having your prize boat take a nosedive off the trailer because you had a wheel failure or a wheel bearing failure. So just kind of continue doing this. Now if you need to put more grease on, do so. There's not a set amount of grease for this job. This is not a Charmin commercial. Less is not more. Just keep pushing. And you see it push through the bearing like that. I can almost push it in with my hand, and you can kind of see it pushing through. So, see that the bearing is fully packed. What I like to do is I like to kind of wipe it around like that. What we do is I'm going to try to aim down. And we take our hub, we put some grease around the race like this. Then we drop our bearing in, and then we do what I like to call sealing in the bearing. So we take a bunch of grease like this, we push it around the outside like this, just kind of create almost like a seal. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to install the wheel seal. So we just kind of set it in there, and wheel seals in, so we put a little grease around the lip of it. And so now what we need to do is we need to put a little anti-seize on the brakes before we get too far ahead of it. Alright, so there's 3 friction pads per shoe. There's one here, there's one here somewhere, right there, and there's one down there. So what you do is you take your screwdriver, you pry the shoe away, you slop on a good helping of anti-seize, and move on to the next one. And then repeat for both. Repeat for both shoes and repeat for both sides. You may want to pay attention because these things are a little intimidating sometimes. Alright, so let's continue with the bearings. So what we need to do is wipe off all the grease on the outside. We don't want any of it on the outside. We're going to flip the hub over, and we're going to take dollops of grease and we're going to put it inside the grease groove, is what it's called. It's kind of an open cavity and you want to fill that nice and full, because any grease that's going to melt because of the heat of the bearings heating up, you want this stuff to wick its way in. So just make sure that that pocket is full. That looks pretty good. And then what we do is we put a little grease on the race. You probably would have gotten it on there anyway. Now, same thing as we did the last time. Dab of grease on my hand. Now you want to take, now this is tapered. You want to take it from the wide end of the taper. Forgot to mention that. And again, just pull the bearing through the grease. They start seeing the grease push through. And again, work your way around. If you really push, this goes a lot faster. Just like that. Okay, so once you're satisfied, drop the bearing in, and then we're going to do that little sealing thing like I always do. It just kind of makes it look neat. I don't know if it does anything, but that's always the way I've been taught, so that's the way I do it. Then what we do is we go over here. My hands are all covered in grease here. We go over here and we put a little bit of grease on the spindle. Put a good helping of it around where the seal rides. Make sure that that's not excessively worn or grooved, or you may have to replace the spindle here. There we go. Now, I'm going to try and clean my hands before I do this. Now, what I didn't show on camera is that I cleaned off the lock nut and off the dust cap and everything else. So it makes reinstallation a little cleaner. You do not want to put old grease back in this again. So now what we do is we pick this guy up. Oh, slide it on. Don't nick the seal. Just gonna slide on nice. All right, a nice greasy mess. We take our thrust washer. Stick that on there. Now we take our lock nut, I honestly think this trailer needs to be double axle. I think that a single's too small for this boat, but since a double axle trailer costs a lot of money and this one came with the boat, we're sticking with a single. Plus the brakes are a lot easier when you only have 2 of them and not 4 of them. Take our big pair of channel locks. We run the nut down. Now also make sure that the drum's in good shape. I figured that was obvious. So tighten it up, let's give it a spin, and then we take it, loosen her off, spin it. Now as we spin, we turn and get the nut as tight as possible by hand. As we can see, the lock nut here is unfortunately covering the holes. What we do is we take it and we back it up until we can see the hole, and then we stick our pin through. These things are the worst. There we go. So turn the cotter pin so almost so the head is kind of sideways in there. Kind of like that. What we do is we take one of the pins and we bend it up and out. Just like that. There we go. That breaks a real good adjustment. Now, there we go. So now what we have to do is we're going to take a little bit of grease. Now you don't have to fill this thing full, but I like to put some in the dust cap for good measure. Kind of prevents the water and stuff from getting in. Alright, where I put the hammer again. This avoids beating up the front. What I sometimes like to do is take a little grease and put it in this cap here and around it. So if there is any water that tries to get in, that'll prevent it from happening. As you can see, these are a real pain to get in. I don't generally like using the bearing buddies on these things, or whatever they're called. Here we go. Usually when it's time to grease them, it's time to repack them anyway. So that's the one side done. So now we just got to put the wheel back on, then we'll go to bleeding the brakes. Alright, so first things first, let's go and let's top up the brake fluid. There's an awful lot of air coming out of there. Now it's okay to overfill it at this stage because there's nothing in the lines right now. I'm just going to pump the brakes a few times. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over on the wheel and we're going to open the wheel. So going underneath here, I already have the little rubber cap off. All you need is a 10mm wrench. We're going to loosen that off and we're going to wait until it starts to dribble fluid. Now we're also going to double check that it's not going to be it's not going to run low, because if it does, then we're going to introduce air into the system. We're going to have to start this whole process over again. Alright, so what I've got is a vacuum pump situated on the bleed screw. And I'm vacuuming out the air while I'm going to check on the master cylinder and make sure I'm not emptying anything. So, I put a very light vacuum on. I'm going to go make sure that the master cylinder doesn't run low. Alright, so once I got the brake fluid coming through the wheel cylinder, what I do is, now I'm just making this up as I go along, you got to bear with me. The top loader units with the master cylinder on the top are a lot easier. You can just take a hitch or a pry bar and just push down on them. These ones are a little stiffer. You can see I'm pushing this cylinder in only about halfway. What I do is I push it in, and I take my screwdriver and I jam it in there. I jam it on, and I jam the screwdriver in there at the same time. Give it a couple whacks, and that jams the brake on. Then what I do is I come over here, and on the back here I let the fluid go. And you can see it when you let it go, that it's dripping out fresh, clean fluid, and there's no air bubbles in it. That way we know that that side is completely bled. So the hardest part is pulling the air through all the lines and getting the fluid into it, because the master cylinder is technically the lower point in the system. Anyway, so now that that's done, now one thing I must say is that you always want to do the one with the long line first. What I mean by that is if we come around to the back here, we notice that there's the brake line, and way down there, there's a junction. Now this side has the longest path to travel, so we want to do this side first to get the vast majority of the air out. Once we've done that, then we can move over to the other side.